Hey everybody, Brad Geiger here, and I just wanted to let you know about the new Kickstarter I just announced at newevilbook.com. I'm kickstarting 2 books at the same time, and I'd love for you to check them out. The first is a Safe for Work collection of all of the Evil Inc. stories from 2018 to 2020. It's 120 glossy pages of super villainous fun. The second book is not safe for work. It takes the first book and adds more than 30 pages of corresponding storylines from Evil Inc. After Dark. You can get whichever one suits you best, or even both. You know, one for show, one for whoa. All of this plus digital extras, artist editions, digital commissions, and even a rare opportunity to get some inked original art. It's all at newevilbook.com. Dave, I've got to tell you, my studio is looking extra spiffy today, and I'm so excited to tell you why.
Extra spiffy. That's a good use of spiffy. All right. Yes.
It is so. Well, as you know, I've been putting up original art and beautiful things on my walls in the new studio. And just the other day, I got something in the mail, packaged up very, very carefully. And it is on the wall as I speak. You can see right behind me, it is a framed and matted collection of Love Is cartoons. Take a look at this.
Oh my gosh, he's holding it up to the camera, and it's actually bigger than I anticipated. That's actually not insubstantial.
It's huge. And there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 different Love Is comics. Looks like they were either photocopied or it couldn't have been clipped out of a newspaper. Looked like it was a really good photocopy and then meticulously matted, because a lot of these are different shapes and sizes. So whoever cut this mat hand cut the mat, and it's absolutely one of the most gorgeous things that I've got up on the wall.
Okay, so I have to give everyone context for this. I saw this on Craigslist, and I was watching it for like the last 6 months because it kept dropping in price. Originally, it was like $50, $40, $30. It got down to $6, and I was like, how can I not get this as a gag gift for Brad Geiger? And so it was $6 to buy it, and I think it was like $25 to ship it. And so I never actually physically saw it because I bought it from San Diego and shipped it to Philadelphia.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a delightful gag gift because it's, like Brad said, it's beautifully framed and matted, like beautifully. Yes. And also, who beautifully frames and mats Love Is, which is the weirdest comic strip of all time. It's not even a comic strip, comic panel of all time. Yeah. I mean, Brad, do you want to read like a sample of Love Is for everybody?
Well, let's give the folks a little background. Love Is was, like you said, from the 1970s. Both characters were little cherub-like characters, little chibi-type characters, very large heads, little bodies, and they were naked, and they had nipples. There was usually a man or a man and a woman, completely naked. Of course, no genitalia, but nipples nonetheless. And it would always be, a love is, and then a continuation of that sentence. And by the way, this was from a New Zealand cartoonist named Kim, who is I just looked her up. Very, very delightful human being, a fantastic person. And her husband, Dave, you got to see this guy with the dark hair and the print frilly shirt from the 1970s.
Oh God, really? Okay.
The mutton chops down the side. You look at this guy's picture and you can tell that he smells like Old Spice, Marlboros, and a stack of 8-track tapes from Conway Twitty.
Oh my gosh. With a little dash of leaded gasoline and polyester thrown in for good measure.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. This is so 70s. And it's the whole, I'm just going to read a few of them to you.
Sure.
A few of them, some of them are very heartwarming and delightful. Like Love Is coming into a warm home on a cold day.
Oh, see, you can't argue with that one. That was lovely.
That's beautiful.
Sure.
Right? Love Is making her feel younger as she gets older.
Oh,
Well, that's sweet.
Very sweet.
Here's another one, Dave, that you'll like. Love is building him up when others have let him down.
Ew, that one's getting a little problematic on that one. Right?
Okay. Well, we'll bring it back with this next one. Here's right next to it. Love is buying clothes with price tags you are happy to show him.
Oh, joking. Now we're getting seriously problematic. Oh, thank you, 1970s. Oh, relationship dynamics of the patriarchy. Yay.
Here's one more for you right at the top. Love is nursing him through his cold when yours is worse.
Oh, love. Brad, I've given you a very problematic gift.
Oh my gosh.
So, big caveat. I just want to reinforce, I bought this off of Craigslist for $6, and I didn't see it in person. Oh my God. I feel like this is going to be a gift that keeps giving in terms of like weird, shitty punchlines of Love Is from the 70s. Also, really we can't emphasize enough how weird it is that they are naked and they are shaped like prepubescent children. They're very cherub-like. It's the whole thing is disturbing. The fact that as a format that this worked ever is mind-boggling to me. And yet it was in Hallmark.
That this made its way into newspapers.
Yeah.
Oh, and you know what I'm just noticing? He doesn't have nipples. She does. He doesn't. They both have navels, but he doesn't have nipples.
And there's no swinging junk downstairs, right? He's Ken Smoothbound.
It's like a Ken doll down there.
Yeah. Because I think, Brad, we all know that's how you distinguish men from women is the nipples, right? I mean, you don't have nipples, right?
No, me? No, it's completely smooth down there.
Yeah, so on that disturbing note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about uncomfortably talking about nipples and making comics.
And nipples and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, overjoyed that Brad's Love Is has arrived in the studio. I'm the cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of the comics documentary Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your love, which is at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. What a smooth transition. You worked it in, Brad, like butter. I tell you what, Love is walking into the house as Brad works the phrase "love is" into conversation. That's what it is for me. Let me just get my lack of nipples out and my Ken Smooth mound, and we're ready to go. Brad, let's jump right into it, my friend. I think we have a fantastic question to jump us off on this week. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah, we're off to the races with this one. This is really interesting. This comes in from Vince, who says, "Dear Dad and Brave, let me start by saying how grateful I am for this podcast. It has been a guiding light through the years of building an archive to delight my future audience." Thank you. I like that too. I've also been singing the podcast's praises at my local comics meetup here in the Bay Area and have my friends quoting and discussing the show.
Oh, great.
I love it. Recently, I've implemented a new social media strategy that mirrors what I've heard you say about walking people up the ladder on Patreon. Focusing on Instagram, I've grown my followers from about 5,000 to over 30,000 in a little over a month. That's fantastic. With a good percentage of that audience moving all the way up to the sale rung of the ladder on Patreon. The strategy basically centers around casting a wide net with captivating short-form videos. Then bringing people to the second rung with more in-depth videos where you talk directly to your audience. And finally, on the third rung, you have the comic where people whose attention you've captured will actually stop to read it. Then, of course, you can have ads in the back of the carousel and talk in the comments, DMs to create fans and make sales. And by the way, I mentioned the sale rung of the ladder, and I put in my own little side note, Patreon. I don't know that this is necessarily Patreon. This person might be selling comics, eComics, things of this nature. He didn't specify
the broad point still stands.
He's making sales one way or the other. It seems like most people growing on social media agree that still images will no longer grow your audience. So my question to you is, with the enshittification of social media and the competition for people's attention, don't you think it's smart to allocate the time to learn what very well may be a vital skill to grow your business in 2024, which is captivating short-form video content? I'm sorry I didn't have time to write a shorter question. Thanks again. He actually said that. I'm sorry I didn't have time. He certainly had time to write a long question.
You know what, though? There is truth to that. It does take longer to minimize and to edit down. So, yes, I actually see the wisdom of that. But actually, the question is perfectly valid. And I think it can be summarized, and Brad can correct me if he feels differently. I think it's two separate questions. One is, the broader question of social media is clearly breaking or broken, and how do we react to that? That's question number one. Mm-hmm. And question number two is it a valid solution to become an animator in lieu of or alongside of being a cartoonist? Right. Would you think that there's is there a third question of that hidden in there, Brad, or is that the two basic questions to be answered?
That's the main question. And to be absolutely fair to this person, having read through all the way through this question a second time, obviously I read it when I put it over into our questions pile, but this person isn't talking necessarily about completely becoming an animator, because they're still selling comic books from what I can see, right? They're still talking about selling and doing that sort of thing, but they're talking about incorporating this animation into that as I'm reading that, right?
Yes.
So the question is it worth it? Don't you think it's worth the time that it would take to do this? But your point is correct in that you are now becoming somewhat of an animator in doing that, and at some point your audience may very well expect this, and we've seen exactly this sort of thing happen. And by the way, Chris Hallback, our friend and our colleague, has kind of done what you're talking about, in that he's completely made a pivot into doing animation. It's the most of what he posts is animation, but he's also still doing comics. He's still doing print versions of his comics. He's doing children's book. He's a really good example of exactly what Vince is talking about in terms of incorporating that into his bag of tricks, if you will.
Right. Well, okay, let's jump into the first part of the question, too, which is social media is breaking or broken, and how do we react to that? Because it is true that as soon as you post anything moving, it has algorithmically better chances of spreading or being nudged along the way than a still image. And so your reaction might be to say, well, why am I sailing into the wind trying to post still image after still image? Clearly, social media wants me to post moving images. So then you have to ask yourself, the basic question is, am I doing this because it benefits social media, the platform, or am I doing this because it benefits my career? Well, you could argue that, I'm doing both, and so therefore it's worth it to me to do it. But I would argue that having come from a world online that existed before social media, Brad and I started roughly about the same time, 98, 99, 2000 online. And seeing that an audience could be built. Now, granted, this was a different world, but seeing that an audience could be built without social media and knowing that you could still have a relationship and sell to those readers without social media, I can see a world again where we don't have to rely on as much or shouldn't feel broken down by social media saying you've got to produce moving art. that you can still be what you want to be and find that audience. It's harder. It's a trickier world. It's a nebulous world right now because we're sort of in this interregnum period between what used to work, what's currently broken, and what potentially will work again 2, 3, 5 years down the road. Yeah. But I am not of the opinion that for my career to grow and succeed, I have to change who I am in order to make social media, quote unquote, work. Brad, what's your first reaction to that first question?
Oh, I agree. In other words, what Vince is seeing here is, hey, social media has changed. So what are we going to do about it? And Vince's answer is change with social media. Social media is rewarding motion. So Vince says very, very understandably, so I'm doing motion. Right. Yep. That's what I'm going to do. If that's what's being rewarded, that's what I'm going to do. And he's got very good results out of it. Right. Mm-hmm. If he goes from 5K to 30K in 4 weeks, you can't argue with that kind of success. And, there might be any number of, I would probably hasten to add, he's probably doing a pretty good comic there too, right? You could put motion on a lot of comics out there, and you're not gonna get that same kind of growth. Yeah, you can't
shine a turd. Exactly.
Right. So clearly he's got something going for him, but you can't argue with what he's saying. And he's saying, social media is rewarding this, so I'm changing to give myself the best opportunity for success. That's a fair answer. I think what Dave and I are going to tell you is it's not the only answer. And the other thing, the other answer is one that Dave and I are kind of reverting to is that there was a world before social media. We found readers in that world. We know how to do that. And if it means going back to that, those are roads that we know how to travel. If it means going back to a pre-social media time or incorporating more likely those lessons that we learned in pre-social media and incorporating that to 2024 and forward, we're okay with that too. And that's also a valid answer to this whole question that you're posing, right? I will say this. In fact, if you go back far enough into ProTips, I've done what you're talking about. I have incorporated motion into social media outreach for Evil Inc. I've talked about it on ProTips. I've suggested a few ways to do it. I've experimented with a few different ways to do it, including voiceover and all and moving the image, the static image. I've done a lot of this, and I can tell you, for me, number one, I certainly wasn't getting the kind of traction that you're getting. And number two, the amount of time I was putting into it made it so that the other things in my business that were generating income, like Patreon, were getting pushed to the side. And very quickly, I could see I needed to focus all of my efforts on this one part of my business that was working, and putting all of this effort and time into animation just wasn't, for me, a good return on investment. You're saying it's different from you. There may be a number of people in our audience for whom it may be different, or who are coming up with different ways of applying this for themselves. All that I'm going to caution you is that although your answer is a good one, it's also not the only one.
Yeah, and I will. So now I want to transition to the second part, which is, I think, separate from whether social media, how it's working or not working, the question of becoming an animator or trying out animation or making that part of your process, regardless of what social media is doing. And first of all, I want to start by saying animation is a beautiful, powerful art form. I love it. I respect it. If anything, culturally, it's probably way more powerful than comics right now. So I want to acknowledge that right up front. Not only is it a super valid form of art, but it's, if anything, it's culturally more powerful than comics right now. Right. So that leads me to my second thing, which is I don't want to be an animator. I never wanted to be an animator, right? So to me, and for a percentage of us, it's like saying, hey, hey, you do photography, you should go into filmmaking. And it's like, no, I don't want to go into filmmaking. I want to be a photographer. That's a very different art form. It has a totally different set of rules. The Venn diagram of skills is very similar as it is with cartoonists and animators. Like, I have the voice talent to do my own voice work. I have the ability to draw simplified and repeatably. So that's a given. I have an audience who's probably receptive to my work transformed into animation. So I've got that going for me. So I have all the pieces. But the thing is, even though all those Venn diagrams kind of line up, it's not, for me, it's not what I want to do. And it's one more step away from my dream of being and doing cartooning if I do animation. So it's very similar. But it's like telling someone who loves improv or loves sketch comedy that, like, well, if you really want to succeed, you got to do stand-up. And they're like, I don't want to do stand-up. The skill set's very similar, but I don't want to do stand-up. I want to do sketch, or I want to do improv. And so I don't feel wrong in saying, like, if the social media world is requiring me to do animation, then I will take the longer, slower road, because I don't want to be an animator. It's not what I want to do. It's not what I set out to do. It's not my skill set. It's not a skill set I want to learn. Just speaking between you, I, and the world, animation seems like drudgery to me. It seems like it's the same reason why I hate editing. Like, editing video is just like drudgery to me. It's just like so slow, and the potential for output is slowed. Regardless of how fast you are as an animator, the potential output is slowed. And I don't know how to monetize it once I've got them with, like, okay, so I've hooked them by animation. Well, great. Now they're coming from my animation. They're not coming from my comics. And so how do I then, I'm assuming I could somewhat transfer 10% of that audience into a book buying public, but maybe not. And am I now an animator instead of a cartoonist, if that's the case? So that's a very long answer, which is the short version is, I don't want to be an animator. I want to be a cartoonist. And so, Brad, what's your response to that second set of question?
No, I'm 100% on the same thing, but I don't want to yuck anybody's yum. Right?
No, in other words, I love animation. Exactly. Yes,
I think it's great. This is, and I without repeating myself, I've tried this. I didn't get the ROI that you are reporting. So my thought is, if this is working and you like this and it works for you, I think you should absolutely be doing it. And it's something we've talked about. Incorporating certain video aspects to your social media outreach in the past on the show. So I'm with you. I'm there 100%. You're not going to see it out of me also, because my stuff is a little bit more difficult to translate into that. Right. My artwork is a little bit more, I don't have a minimalist artwork that can translate very well into an animated scene. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think what you're talking about, Vince, is a great idea. But it's not the only way to address this problem, is kind of what I'm thinking. And I'm kind of with Dave in that, I'm doing what I'm doing. This is working very well for my business. I don't see it as something that is a good fit for me. But if it's a good fit for you, I think that's fantastic. And it could be a good fit for other people as well.
Yeah. And I almost want to counteract what I said earlier by now saying that all of us, myself included, Brad included, have to make, on some level, certain compromises and have to wear some hats that we don't want to wear in order to make the core thing that we want to do, which is to make comics, share comics, and make a living from comics possible. So I have to put on the hat of publisher. I have to put on the hat of showman when I'm doing a Kickstarter video. And maybe I or someone like me is not comfortable being a showman, right? Or maybe I or someone like me is not comfortable being a publisher, a self-publisher. Or maybe I or someone like me is not comfortable going to a comics convention and having to stand there and sell. All of which I'm saying is each one of us have to make compromises. And so I want to doff the cap to you that if this is working for you, and this is one of the compromises that you're willing to make, i.e. transferring your art and skills into animation in order to lift up your comics, on some level, who am I to tell you that that's not a valid path? That's a super valid path to go. For me, it's not one that I like because I never wanted to be an animator and I don't want to put on that hat. But for the same reason that I say publishing has worked for me, being a showman has worked for me, Comic-Cons have worked for me, who am I to say that animation isn't a totally valid path for you to lift your comics?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree 100%. I think this is one of those moments where we agree that there are many paths to the top of the mountain. What you're talking about is a fantastic one. It's not going to be one that Dave or I do anytime soon, I don't think. But for some of the people listening on our podcast audience, might be something that's a good fit for them. It's one of the many paths to the top of the same mountain.
And I'll be honest, too, it might also be a generational thing, Brad, if we're willing to admit it, in the sense that people that came up after us grew up with editing software, grew up with school projects that involved editing a file or, a video file for this or that, in a way that learning something at your age, Brad, requires X amount of time. And you now have a given amount of income with Evil Link. I have a given amount of income with Sheldon or Drive. So to learn or teach myself Drive, in some respects, I have to temporarily give up income currently, do you know what I mean, in order to learn this thing. So sometimes it's a matter of is your career not yet working and generating income? Well, then now's the time to learn animation, I guess. Or have you already learned it in school? Well, then great, apply that. But if you're already established, it's trickier. It's sort of the catch-22 of being an established artist, I think. Yeah.
Now let's take animation off the table just for a second. Let's say that this isn't about animation at all. Maybe because there's another way to read this question, and that is he's doing short videos. Okay, well, that's kind of what I was doing with TikTok for a little while there.
Yeah, the thirst trap videos.
Yes, which were fantastic, right?
Yeah, everyone remembers the nipple clamps. They were wonderful, Brad. Good work.
Which was hard to do without any actual nipples, if you remember. But
what a great callback. I didn't see that coming. Oh, man.
But okay, let's say that this isn't animation. Let's say that this person or somebody else listening in our audience is saying, well, they're doing video outreach, they're incorporating video outreach, and they're pointing to the comic. And again, we've talked about that on the show. We're proponents of that. I did that on TikTok. I've done that. I've incorporated emotion and film type applications to a lot of my outreach. Again, for me, did not have here's the bottom line of all this. I encourage the people in our audience to experiment with that sort of thing, even if it's not animation, even if it's just adding a little motion, or even if it's doing a TikTok or something like that, where you're putting yourself out there and talking, or some combination of that. By the way, take a look at go up to my either my Substack or my Twitter. Oh God, they're all over the place. Take a look at the number of ways that I take a time-lapse video and then play a Comic Lab clip over the time-lapse video. Well, that falls into the category of what Vince is talking about, short film outreach, because film and motion is better adapted for social media. We've done all of that stuff. We're proponents of it. We've done it. We've got a deep catalog. The reason that we don't emphasize it a whole lot, the reason that I don't talk about it as much as some other things, is because, again, and here's what I want you listening at home to really focus on. This is something that you might want to try. This is something that might be a good fit for you, might be very good for you. I want you to be honest about the ROI, return on investment. How much time is this taking? What is the return on that investment of time? Is this working? If you're like Vince and you're going from 5,000 subscribers to 30,000, that's a solid return on investment. You keep doing that, Vince. You got something figured out. You keep doing it. For those of you listening at home, I want you to take a solid look at that ROI. Is that a good fit for you? Experiment with it for a week or so, or for a month or so, like Vince's been doing for a month.
Or for a year, if you want to really see how it plays out,
Experiment with it. See what's working. but be honest with yourself about the ROI, because my thought is there's a whole bunch of us for whom this is not going to be a good fit. And I would hate to see you get into this mindset where, well, hey, I'm supposed to grow my followers 6 times as much the way Vince did. And I'm doing what Vince is saying. I don't know why this isn't working. Well, there's a whole lot of reasons that might be. So if you are going to do that, look at your ROI. Is it worth the amount of time that you're putting into it?
Yep. And as a version of ROI, sort of a parallel extension to that idea that I super co-sign with Brad, I will also say, just make sure that whatever the side hustle is, and in this case of the question asker, it's animation. In Brad's case, it was previously the Thirst Trap videos about how to make web comics.
Yeah.
In other people's case, it might be music videos for their comics. I've seen that done. Like my friend Kate McCucci does that. Whatever it is, whatever the side hustle is to the core thing of comics that you want to make, just be sure that parallel to the ROI, are you getting famous for the thing you want to get famous for? And can you monetize that thing, right?
Yeah.
Because what might grow you on social media might not make you famous for the thing you want to be famous for, and it might not be monetizable in the way you're hoping for. So just be careful, whatever the side hustle is, there's a good ROI, like Brad said, and I will say that it's making you famous for the thing you want to be famous for.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Dave, there's something going on. I have never seen such a strong response to something that we've done on the show, and I am really, really excited. Remember last episode, we talked about the Comic Lab Short Story Challenge?
Yes.
Well, people have been taking us up on our challenge. People have been really excited. We've already gotten some early comics that have been posted in the Comic Lab Discord server. They've been absolutely delightful. And there's a whole bunch more people sharing their plans, their story outline, their story beats, and working as we speak. We're going to see more and more of this coming up. And I got to tell you, I'm here for it. This is absolutely amazing.
This is exciting because a lot of what we talked about before is once you've cut your teeth practicing on a short story, it unlocks a lot of other storytelling possibilities for you. And I too, Brad, have noticed that people are really reacting to this short story challenge. I've had old women stop me at a grocery store. I've had young kids run up to me on the street. Mister, I'm ready to do my short story challenge. Yeah. So yes, this is an exciting time for Comic Lab because in all seriousness, we have already started to get submissions and a lot of people sending in sketches and pages and thoughts about what they're going to do for their short story challenge. So this is great. I'm excited and I'm here for it.
And to make sure that you understand, there's no deadline for this. There's no timeline. If you're listening to this, certainly no. The award for this is the participation and to share what you're doing. We don't want to make this competitive. We don't want and if you're listening to this podcast and it's 2025 or 2026, you can still participate. There's no end date in this. This is something that we hope to see short stories being posted throughout the year. And it's always a good time to jump into the Comic Lab Discord server and share what you've got. And speaking of time and timeliness, Dave, you've got an update for us.
I do, yes. Well, the first one, I have 2 updates. The first one is Eisner Awards. The submission for 2023, which will be the 2024 awards, but it's for work done in 2023, is coming up on March 15th. So if you have not yet submitted, you're going to want to go to your Google Eisner Awards PDF, and there will be a one-page black and white PDF that hasn't changed since 1962. And you're going to want to follow the instructions on that sheet to submit your Eisner Awards. Remember that for webcomics, it's only long form that can be submitted. There's nothing short form. There's no comic strips, comic panels that are accepted. It's sort of a historical weirdness about the Eisner Awards. Yeah. But it's fun to try it. It's fun to look over your work, to get it together. It's fun to submit it. And then it's fun to see how webcomics will be completely overlooked in general for something that one of the publishing houses has put together. So absolutely
funny how that works. Funny how that works. Well, speaking about overlooking, we want to make sure that you're not overlooking a few details from our previous conversation about artificial intelligence, specifically where it intersects with art. And Dave, yes. I think that is a perfect lead in to a few thoughts that you wanted to share.
Yeah, and Brad and I were talking after the last show because I had kind of spoken somewhat off the cuff about how artists might need to prepare themselves for the fact that in bulk, when done right, AI and generative art might be fair use. And not that I'm necessarily saying that I'm for it, not that I'm saying that I'm here for it, not that I'm saying that I welcome it with my art, but that we might need to prepare for the fact that it is, in fact, fair use and that artists and studios are going to lose a lot of lawsuits. Now, I'm not saying that's the case. This is unestablished copyright law. And so that by very definition, no one knows yet how those court cases are going to come down. The U.S. Copyright Office has a small subgroup that's currently working on this problem in terms of, as far as I understand it, it's a small group of, I think, like 3 to 12 people that are trying to put their own stamp on it before the courts even do it in terms of how the Copyright Office is going to respond to this. But there are a number of court cases working their way through the system in terms of whether or not this is fair use. And so I just wanted to clarify some of my comments from, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago. It hasn't even aired yet, so who knows if people are going to react poorly or wonderfully to it. But I wanted to do it because I think it's worth going sort of point by point and talking about how where AI generative art is clearly stepping on the toes of copyright and will need to be course corrected, but how if it is done correctly with time and some noodling, that we might unfortunately be living in a world where AI's generative creation of works is fair use. So let's talk about it in a couple different steps. I got about 5 different steps here, and I'm going to pound through it real quick as an update. And so step number 1 is it fair use for AI or computer systems to ingest tons of copyrighted work to train an AI model? This is where they scrape Brad's site or they scrape my site and they take every Sheldon ever made or every Evil Link ever made. Is that fair use for them to ingest tons of copyrighted work? So again, none of this has been established. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm going to suggest that that is fair use. Number 1, because web crawling has already been established as fair use in the courts, right? That Google can send its spiders, Yahoo can send its spiders, Bing can also send its spiders through all my websites, categorize everything, take copies of my art, right? All of that is fair use. Also, the courts have established that when done right, go ahead, Brad, you want to pause for a second? Yeah.
And what you're saying is, and because fair use is kind of a loaded term, right? You are not saying that this is ethical necessarily. You are not saying that this is a good thing necessarily. In other words, you're not putting a stamp of approval when you say fair.
No,
right? You're saying specifically what you're saying is that this falls under a specific legal category of an official legal category of copyright law that is called fair use. In other words, you're not saying it's fair game. You're saying it's specifically fair use. It may be unethical, but it might also be fair use. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes, and in fact, it may not be fair use. I'm trying to prepare our artist friends and my own heart that this might big chunks of this might be fair use for reasons that we might not even agree with, by the way. But it sort of is what it is in our capitalist world, that this is fair use as our societies have established it. And so I want to say that it's not yet established that this is fair use, but that I want to suggest that it might end up being fair use because web crawling has been established as fair use, pretty similar if you think about it. And book scanning and machine learning have both been established as fair use. Like there have been iterations where it's been specific, where Google Books is not allowed to replicate certain copyrighted works. But overall, book scanning and machine learning is fair use because democracies tend to want to allow for educational purposes of scanning and book scanning and digital searching. And there's been a couple court cases about that. And so I also want to establish that artists learn from bodies of work from older artists. That's fair use if I learn from Watterson, or I learn from Gary Larson, or I learn from Burke Breathed. And so it's not profoundly different here, aside from scale, which the Copyright Office and the courts might say is profoundly different. But I just want to suggest that even though the scale and the efficiency of what AI is doing is not that much different than what I, as an artist, is doing when I ingest Watterson's work and I own everything he's ever made, and I learn from it, right?
Yeah.
What I'm suggesting is none of the core tenets of that are different enough to suggest that that might not be fair use. It might be, again, and to Brad's point, it might not be ethical either. Right. Because I'm paying the server costs for anytime Google trawls my website, or I'm paying the server cost if OpenAI is trawling my website, right? So is it ethical that I'm paying for the server fees that they're taking my images from? No, not ethically. No, that's not. But the courts have established that I'm putting my art out there publicly, and so therefore it's fair use to ingest that. Again, not established, but I just want to prepare everybody that this might be considered fair use. So that's number one. Number two is it fair use to perfectly replicate an artist's style? And this is where a lot of people get really nervous about it, right?
Yeah.
And so, at least as my understanding, not a lawyer again, but I just want to prepare everybody. Style in the US is not protected copyright. Copyright protects finished works of art. So a way to look at that is that, like, a copyright, the expression of copyright usually consists of multiple factors under the court. Like it's your style, it's your composition, it's the content, it's the color, it's the narrative, it's the artistic intent, it's the framing of how you do it. All of that comes together in a finished work. Brad's an Evil Ink comic strip, or a comic page. He has done this finished work. That is then copyrighted. But Brad's style inside is not necessarily copyrighted, right? So people can paint like Monet. People can draw like Watterson. It happens all the time, right? And it's not necessarily an infringement on copyright. It can be based on how derivative it is, which we'll get into in a second. But in general, style by itself is not copyrighted. So I just want to prepare everybody for that, because that gets people nervous. And it's awkward because it does tread into derivative works. But it's like, remember, Brad, when Star Wars, someone was doing a bunch of Star Wars comics in Watterson style. Perfectly done, Watterson style. Yeah. But they were all based on Star Wars characters, but drawn like Calvin and Hobbes. It's an interesting, weird, nebulous point that it is the style of Watterson perfectly replicated, but is it a copyright infringement? Well, then it's a question of derivativeness and whether or not it both harms Watterson. There's an argument to be made there that it does, and whether or not it's being monetized. And in that case, it wasn't. So that's not necessarily a harm, right? So anyway. Let's get into the third one. So that's a more nebulous thing about whether or not something is derivative. So, but I just want to warn you that the replication of style itself is not necessarily an infringement of copyright. It can be fair use to replicate my style perfectly, absolutely perfectly, could be within fair use. So what are derivative works? Let's talk about that for a second. So can AI then make Sheldons and Drives or Mickey Mouse comics? Well, no. Copyright would obviously still apply to existing works. So under a version of that old pornography law of I know it when I see it. Remember, Brad, when that Supreme Court justice says, I know pornography when I see it?
Right.
The courts will take, if I sue someone based on producing Sheldon comics or Drive comics or Evil Ink comics or Mickey Mouse comics, they'll hold up whatever AI produces to a Mickey Mouse comic and say, this is nigh indistinguishable, or it's so close that the average person would know it when they see it, that's a Mickey Mouse comic strip. So yes, that's obviously copyright infringement. But if anyone tries to monetize a Sheldon comic or a Mickey Mouse comic, you would get sued. But that's also true just like now, right? I would sue someone that was trying to make by hand drawing a Sheldon comic or using Sheldon characters. So we're still protected under the same rubric of copyright law then as we are right now. But then what about derivative works? And this one, I grant you, is where it's going to get weird and interesting in the courts is what about something that's clearly adapted or translated from a Sheldon? It's modified from an existing Sheldon. That's where it gets interesting. And that's where it's a maybe. And I don't know. I honestly don't know where the Copyright Office or the courts are going to come down on this, because the right to make a derivative work does originate with the original owner. Like Sheldon, as the creator, I have the say or no go on whether or not someone makes a derivative work. But for a lot of court cases, you either have to show harm to the original copyrighted work or that someone was profiting in a way that you didn't approve. And so that's also going to get interesting, because an individual piece that an AI produces doesn't necessarily profit the AI company, but the existence of the rubric that allows for the creation of that, like OpenAI's AI does make them money. So then the courts have yet to answer whether that is going to be a harmful profit. You know what I mean, Brad? Where the structure itself makes profit, not the individual work. And so that has yet to be ruled on. So let's get down to where it's going to get tricky ground. So you can get AI to perfectly replicate finished works of art. And we've seen that. Like, look at this, Brad. I got AI to perfectly produce Mario using these prompts. Or I got AI to perfectly reproduce the Joker. That's obviously infringement. That's the 100%. And every time the courts are going to come down for the original copyright holder. So that's not a concern of ours. I personally believe that will be programmed out over time. The AI will get smart enough to compare whatever it produces against the vast panoply of art ever produced and say, nope, this is too close to the Joker. This is too close to Mario. I'm not going to generate this art. Right now, it's too dumb, if you know what I mean. It doesn't have the ability to compare against the entire opus of art. So then the question is, how derivative is derivative? Like, how far away from the Joker or Mario can AI produce? And that, again, goes back to that Justice's pornography reference of I know it when I see it. You're going to have to hold up each one in court and be like, this is too close. This is not close. This is too close. It's going to get really dicey and real. And the scale of it is what's going to murder all of us, is because you're going to have to pull up every version of every image that could be made by AI or that was made by AI and bring it into court. So how do we compete against the scale of it? This is where it's tricky ground, because it's like John Henry and the steam engine. Like, I could bring individual cases for individually produced pieces of AI art, right? The problem is that same AI engine can produce 10,000 things by the time I even file the first court case against that piece that was created 3 weeks ago. So it's like John Henry. The human heart can't compete with that AI generative engine. So a lot of people think, well, maybe the courts will come down and the Copyright Office will come down by saying, like, listen, this goes against the heart, the soul of what copyright was meant to do, which was to encourage human creativity. And if we're murdering human creativity for the benefit of the AI, maybe we need to relook at copyright art law. And so there may, in the US and Australia and New Zealand and English, all of which come from, Hogarth's Copyright Act of 1747 tradition, we might need to rewrite copyright law. But as it's written right now, I just want to warn my friends that a lot of this kind of feels like it might fall under fair use. So it's weird. And basically, I just want to forewarn everybody that artists and studios may lose a lot of cases. And because so much of copyright law is set up to balance, one, society's access to and the use of art versus two, an artist being able to control and monetize their finished works of art. And because number one allows for a lot of weird permutations of fair use that never anticipated or AI and generative art, we might see a lot of people losing court cases under the fair use rubric. And is it fair? Maybe not. Is it ethical? Probably not. Definitely not. But I just want to forewarn my friends that even though I don't necessarily agree with it, I think we need to prepare our hearts for a world where not only does AI exist, it might be protected as fair use under a lot of with certain parameters having been established, as I talked about, fair use might be allowed, or generative AI might be allowed as fair use. And that was a lot of energy and a lot of talking. But Brad, where did I go wrong? Where do you think I'm wrong? Correct me on that.
No, you make a lot of good points, and I'll just underline: you're not endorsing artificial intelligence when it comes to art. But you are saying that we need to prepare ourselves as an artistic community for what might be coming down the line. I think you're right when you say that certain people might lose lawsuits. However, I'm going to say, and maybe I don't know, I'm so happy they are bringing those lawsuits. I'm glad they're asking the question. I'm glad they're holding
Agreed.
to the feet to the fire. They're fighting the good fight, and they deserve our support and our encouragement. Could they lose this? I think they themselves are very realistic about what they're getting into. But man, is it ever important that they're doing it in the first place? Because otherwise, this thing would be going off unchecked, and nobody would be asking these questions if they weren't putting it out in the forefront and saying, "Wait a minute, let's talk about." Because everything you just talked about was really worth asking yourself. In fact, I would encourage anyone listening to this show to go back and listen to that segment and ask themselves, well, how do I feel about that? What do I agree? Do I disagree? And why? Because these are all issues that each and every one of us is going to be dealing with. And again, very important to discern, the copyright title of fair use, which is a very specific thing that has a number, I think 5 different qualifications for what is fair use, and to take that and hold it separate from the ethics of it, or what I'll call fair play. Right. It might very well be fair use, but it's not fair play. In other words, it's not ethical. It's not a good thing. It's not happy that they did this.
Right. And to that point of fair play, one of the reasons why I'm warning specifically our illustrator friends that we are entering a world where the regional or local illustration job might completely disappear is it wasn't necessarily fair play when Microsoft Office came into existence and replaced every secretary you ever knew in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s with software that you could do from your own desk, right? That wasn't necessarily fair play, but it was fair in society's broader sense. And so there is going to be an incredibly painful transition, I think, specifically for illustrators. And I don't know that any of us can fight against this tide because the Pandora's box has already been opened. So even if a lot of these systems get nailed down in democracies, there's definitely going to be Chinese AIs that you can hire for pennies on the dollar to produce an illustration for you. And we'll happily do it because Chinese law won't apply in terms of copyright for US systems. So we know that this Pandora's box has already been opened. And so I just want to prepare, especially illustrator friends, that this might be a moment like when the camera came around for newspapers and newsprint and magazines, where an entire class of illustrators just was wiped out. And I think that is what's going to happen to a lot of classes of illustrator in the next 5 to 10 years. I really do. And it's, again, not fair play, but will society allow it? I think it might, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Well, Dave, we've got time for one last Patreon question, and it'd be a good one to wrap the show up. And it comes in from our friend Make Kong, who says, what would make you consider releasing a digital-only ebook with a never-published story on an online retailer as an exclusive? So we got a lot of moving parts. It's an ebook with a never before published story on an online retailer as an exclusive. They go on to say, I understand this can fall under the Patreon exclusives and the Kickstarter plans for the current webcomic flow, but would there be one story, one project that you would like to send a Voyager probe on this infinite pool of readers? So, Dave, what would it take to get you to consider releasing a digital-only ebook with a never-before-published story on an online retailer as an exclusive?
Right. And we can quibble about permutations of this question and things, but The short answer for me, and I'll give you my longer answer in a minute, but the shorter answer is money. If there was money to be made in doing this, I would do it. And a lot of people would do it. But my big overall umbrella to this is that I don't think there's any money in this. And that's why I don't do something like this. How about you, Brad? What would make you do a digital-only ebook on an exclusive platform with a never-before-told story?
Here's so what is not the question here? Okay. In other words, I want to give you the tools to answer this question for yourself. And the question that you should be asking is not what would make you do, right? The question is, it's similar, but it's really important distinction. Why? Why would you do that, right? Why would you take an exclusive that was never before published, right? Either it's got no audience and then you're just kind of taking a shot in the dark, or at which point you'd be a lot smarter to develop that on social media or to find a way to develop that on an ongoing thing with readers, not just do this whole thing and then send it out, like he says, like a Voyager probe. Wouldn't you instead want to do that maybe page by page or update and by
build
update,
that audience,
and build and also take the feedback and say, oh, this is working, this isn't working. That's what social media is for. That's what web comics, that's what web publishing is for.
Right.
Why would you take and do this whole thing? Again, the question is why? Why are you doing this, right? And so why do all this and then send it out like a Voyager probe? And here's the next question. Online retailer exclusive. Why? Why am I giving this to an online? First of all, why am I setting up an online exclusive retail situation? Well, the only reason I could think of is one of two things. I'm getting a sweetheart deal. Let's say they instead of giving a 25% cut, they're giving me a 70% cut. And I'm getting a benefit that way. But even so, again, since I don't have a proven audience for this thing, it's still kind of a question mark. And of course, the obvious answer for an exclusive online retailer is Amazon's KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing, which requires you to enter into an exclusive agreement. And the reason you do that is because Amazon has built such a huge audience that even though they give you pennies, you're counting on your ability to have thousands and thousands and thousands of readers, and those pennies, add up to real money, right?
Right.
And again, why are you rolling the dice on getting this whole thing done and then putting it out as an exclusive? Why? Why? The big question. There's all these, and by the way, you could come up with 12 more questions that sound exactly like this. Well, what if you did and then you just do like Mad Libs and you start filling in the blanks, right? And you can send in the next dozen questions that sound just like this. I want you to start to answer these for yourself and ask yourself, why would I do that? And the next question you send in should be, here's my strategy. I've asked why. Here's the way it's going to work. What do you think? That's the next question I want to get, right? And not it's pie in the sky. Well, what if it had a blue cover? What if it had a purple cover? What if it wasn't exclusive? Well, all this Mad Libs planning that you're doing, wipe it all free and instead ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I signing in for an exclusive relationship on this comic that has no proven audience that I've spent all this time into making?
Right.
There's no upside. There's no upside to any of that. And those are the questions that you need to start asking yourself.
I want to take a different attitude by sharing some numbers, which is that ebooks are not a money spinner for me. There might be people for whom ebooks are incredible money makers, and I can't think of anybody offhand, but I'll just tell you what my numbers are. On an average year, I'm making a couple $100, like let's say somewhere between $200 and $600 on ebooks. If I kickstart a Drive book, I make those are the great years for ebooks. I make about $4,000 on the ebook within the Kickstarter of like Drive Act 3, right?
Right.
But in general, ebooks are not sellers because I think for the average person, it feels a lot like what they're reading online for free, right? There's not enough people yet that love to curl up with their Kindle or their iPad and read on a Sunday afternoon. For a bunch of good reasons, people still love a book, and they love the physical, the smell, the tactile, the approachability of it. You can throw it in a book bag. Books still sell. Ebooks, not so much. And also you can't command as good a price for them. So what I'm saying is, when I said money would have to make me want to do this thing, is it's an awful lot of work to produce something that just is going to be an ebook. If anything, my ebooks are an afterthought to the book that was produced in my Kickstarters and the like. And so, yes, they make me anywhere from 500 to, in the case of Drive, 4,000 per ebook. But it's not, I'm not building a career on that. That's the sort of, long tail of what a Kickstarter can help with. But it's not, I don't set out to do it because there's not enough money there. There's not a there.
Well, yeah, let's put that in another way. Dave always talks about having many legs under the table. Ebooks, ebooks and eComics can be one of those legs, but you have to be realistic. It's a very, very skinny leg. In other words,
it's there.
Long,
it's a leg.
Yep. It's like a pool cue, but long before you put the Thanksgiving turkey down on the table, you want to make sure that that's not the only leg you've got. Right? Because it's going to snap. There's nothing there. It's good in addition. It's a good complement to all those other legs. And by the way, the main reason, like on a Kickstarter, and I went back because I'm planning my next Kickstarter. I did really good with ebooks and rewards that was just digital ebooks and collection of eComics and stuff like that. They were a big generator for me. They're not unimportant. However, the main reason you've got them there is to walk your people up the ladder of Kickstarter. You start them with like a $5 or a $10 PDF, right? DRM free PDF. And then you walk them up to the next one. Well, here's a package of PDFs. Here's a whole library of PDFs. Now here's the physical book. And that keeps playing its role because then even that book comes with the PDF, comes with the eComic, right? So every time that person that you are walking up the ladder is doing their mental math, that PDF is playing a role in increasing the value that they're getting. Hey, I'm only paying $20. This book is going to retail for $25. I'm getting the book and the ebook as well. That increases the value. That's the whole role that eComic or that ebook plays in your Kickstarter. It's not nothing. And together again, there's a whole bunch of people that wanted to be involved in my Kickstarter that didn't want the physical reward, and you can't discount them. But by the way, that's also everything that I just said is why I would never send a never before read comic to an online retailer. Remember, retailer, you're getting a cut of the money, not all the money. You're going to get a cut with the retailer. Why would I give a retail? If I had an exclusive, why wouldn't I take it directly to my audience and take 100% of the money? Why would I take a cut to don't get me started. So all of which I said is those are good. They play a very specific role, especially in your Kickstarter. They're not nothing, but they're a skinny leg under the table.
Yeah. And so I want to, again, make this personal because I think some people might be listening and being like, yeah, but Dave, you just brought all your ebooks exclusively to Amazon under their KDP and KDP Unlimited window.
Right.
So what leg are you standing on in this argument? And I want to talk about that because, number one, it's an experiment currently. And it's not an experiment that I'm recommending.
Let's underline this. You're not, because there's been confusion in our very own Comic Lab Discord. There's been confusion. You are not endorsing this at all as something somebody should be trying. You're not endorsing this, right? You're experimenting.
Think of it like climbing up a cliff face, on Yosemite, like you're climbing up Half Dome. And every once in a while, your fingers are reaching up, seeing what you might be able to grab onto. In your career, you want to always have 5 or 6 steady legs under your table, but the 7th one is kind of an experiment to see what might I be able to go into. So for me, doing this KDP thing is 2 things. It's 1, seeing if I can turn my $500 to $1,000 of ebook sales into $700 to $1,400 on Kindle, right? Which might happen after a year of experimentation. My spidey sense, though, so far is that it's not going to work. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, why am I allowing them exclusivity? Well, it's just part of this experimentation. They require exclusivity. Do I love it? No. Do I recommend it? Absolutely not. Secondly, why I'm putting my books onto this platform? Well, isn't that exactly what this question asker is asking? No, it's not. Some of these books are at the far, far end of the long tail of their profitability. Some of these books are 15, 16 years old, are long out of print. And so to me, why not try this out for a year, see if it works? Because otherwise they're only making a couple dozen dollars a year individually. Right. And so I'm certainly not creating anything new. I'm certainly not creating anything new that I'm offering as an exclusive. And I'm certainly not creating anything new that I'm offering as an exclusive just as an ebook, which is like the least monetizable form of book that you could produce. So I heartily don't endorse this plan because there's no money in it. And it's not suddenly going to become a heavily monetizable platform. Ebooks are what they are, which is fine. They are a great way to make a little extra cash on a physical book. I don't necessarily recommend creating new work for any form of ebook.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that's where you've really got to put your focus on, is the new work. And it's where we got to put our focus on, because this show is already an old show. We got to start thinking about the new show already that we're going to have for you next week. But we can't do that until we say this. You've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Link at evilcomic.com.
And my close personal friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the wonderful comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And just because I feel like we can't say it enough, I do not yet endorse or condone going on to Amazon Kindle KDP. I just want to reinforce that, because there's always somebody on Discord that says like, well, Dave says we should do it. I just want to reinforce. I'm not yet condoning that. It's an experiment. I do not condone it. Also, I just want to reinforce, I don't condone or love or in any way look forward to a world where generative AI is everywhere. I hate it. But I just wanted to tell my artist friends that we might want to prepare a part of our heart that we're going to lose some of these court cases. That's all I wanted to do. And so anyway, I will say the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by the ever wonderful Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. But listen, thank you so much for everybody that has been giving us those 5-star reviews. You're keeping us right at the top. You're bringing in new people that we're thrilled to be welcoming into the show. You're doing your part. You're such a great part. If you haven't done it yet, it's a great way to show your participation in the Comic Lab community. Go over there, give us that review, and help bring this show to another cartoonist who badly needs to hear my foghorn voice.
And I will say, as much as we always say, leave a review on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts and such, honestly, the word of mouth is where it really spreads.
Oh my
goodness. So often have folks come up to us at Comic-Cons or at signings or at speaking engagements and say, how I found the podcast? It was such and such an artist said to me I should listen to the podcast. So thank you to everyone who spreads it by word of mouth. I will say Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/Comic Lab. So I will go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/Love is walking into a warm home on a cold day with a warm hot chocolate next to a cold heart of a marriage that's gone stale.
This is Love Is. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you're right. I forgot the station identification, didn't I?
Yeah.
I'm Love Is. Naf, naf, naf. All right, Brad, let's see how many, without any preparation, how many Love Is we could come up with that sounds suitably Love Is-y enough, you know?
Love is like pizza and pineapple, incomplete and wrong.
Love is like a warm pat of butter on a pan. It's melty and delicious, but it's burning to the touch. Never mind, that one sucked. All right, what do you got?
Love is like trying to wink with both eyes.
Love is being able to fart in front of one another and feeling zero guilt about the process of being a biological being in this mortal coil.
Love is walking in and seeing that certain someone that you reserved your heart for and them being pretty okay with you too.